Cheers, everyone. It's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, and welcome back to my comic book diary, where I share my comic book thoughts with you on stuff I've read recently. Actually, I'm going to talk a lot about some stuff I read maybe 2.5 weeks ago, and some of the other stuff I've read more recently, because I've been procrastinating. I guess not getting off of the weekly rhythm of doing a pull list has thrown me off, or I don't know. I also seem to be struggling with having a lot of energy to do everything I need to do. And so, sorry to say, but making comic book videos is low on the list, although it's a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks to George from Meanwhile at the Podcast for this cup. This was his Christmas gift to me. I guess I've probably shown it before. And interestingly, recently my daughter and I have been watching a lot of those, what channel, was it from the Cartoon Network or something? The 90s Silver Surfer cartoon. I really love it. She keeps making fun of the bad animation, but it's kind of a weird combo of bad animation but good still art, if that makes sense. But you can almost see that different parts were done by different teams of artists, I guess. So it's also an odd cartoon, but actually one of my very favorite animated superhero cartoons at the moment. Anyway, so it seems like 2+ weeks ago, I did a video on Naman's channel, or joined Naman for a video on his channel, live video, along with Roger from the Metarog channel. And we were discussing the Legion of Superheroes, specifically the Legion of Superheroes drawn by Mike Grell. So I read all of them that he drew, and starting with, was there issue 202, I think was the first issue, but I don't seem to have that here. But 203. So there's about 20 plus issues that he did. And then he came back briefly and did 1 or 2 more later on, which I also read, but I read those digitally. I've been collecting Legion of Superheroes just whenever I find it really cheaply, especially older stuff. But when they said Mike Grell, I was like, yeah, this gives me a reason to get every Mike Grell one, because I wanted that. So a few of them are these 100-page specials, 100-page giants, I guess. Or just says 100 pages for 60 cents. Did they call them 100-page giants later on, or at a different time? So they did a couple of those, and then I'm not sure what was going on. I have read that there were times where they tried to get comics with higher prices just because the owners of the newsstands preferred things with higher prices on them. That's an awesome cover by Grell. And Grell, of course, did a lot. This is issue, the tag on it might be wrong, because issue 208. Grell continued to do covers on the Legion for a long time afterward. And I think I only read 1 or 2 Grell Legion stories as a kid. In fact, I didn't read a whole lot of Legion as a kid, but I have 2 copies of this one, of 209. Oh, that is a Mike Grell cover. I was about to say maybe that's not a Mike Grell cover. But I didn't read a whole lot of it, but I was reading The Warlord, which I guess started while he was still on Legion of Superheroes, and I was very aware of him on Legion of Superheroes and longed to get more of his issues. I wonder if the newsstands near me didn't have Legion of Superheroes, or maybe with my limited budget I would only buy Marvel most of the time. 212. So I won't go over every issue when I flip the camera around, but I will talk about some things that jumped out at me there. There's 2 main writers on this run, Carrie Bates and Jim Shooter, and more of it's by Carrie Bates, and I'm not as crazy about the Carrie Bates stories, although there are a few Carrie Bates ones that I liked a lot, but generally the ones by Jim Shooter stand out. They feel less formulaic and more energetic. And I know the editors had a very tight control on the formulas. I think these were, who were they edited by? Murray Boltinoff or someone like that. And right after this run, Murray Boltinoff leaves, and the editors are people like Al Milgrom and Denny O'Neil, the younger crew of people joining comics. And I think it changes a lot because of that editorial side. 218, Ty Rock, interesting character. I don't know if he's around much anymore. I have 2 copies of that one too. 219, I love the Fatal Five, particularly the princess with the eyeball. Emerald Princess, is that what she's called? So anyway, I felt like when we were discussing it that Naman and especially Roger had more direct nostalgia for these comics, whereas my sort of feeling about them is indirect, something that I didn't read that I wanted to read, and it's not quite what I had thought it would be when I did read it all together. Maybe mostly because of those Carrie Bates stories, which follow this kind of formula. That was 222. Actually, I really like that cover, although I find this a problematic issue. I find everything with Ty Rock problematic in this era. Oh, and this was I loved this issue. 223. Yeah, so it was really heating up, and then Grell left. And Grell's art continuously improves throughout this run. 224. And Jim Shooter sets up all kinds of cool stuff. And then when he leaves, the loose threads are not picked up very well, in my opinion, by Paul Levitz and the other, Jerry Conway and the other writers. I also, actually quite a long while ago, me and my daughter read every single page of the Legion Who's Who. And I think this is a really great, fun series. I may have talked about it before. If you like just reading all the trivia about all the groups. I love these spread covers, and I wonder if there's a reprint of it, because the printing is very bad. It's kind of blurry, at least in the copies I have. But there's something fascinating about the Legion because of its vastness. The vast number of characters alone carry this huge weight of fascination. So yeah, actually right now my daughter and I are reading the official handbook of the Marvel Universe as kind of wind down at the end of the day reading together. But I kind of looked back through all this stuff and had fun. Because of this Legion project, I had this hardback book of, what do they call it? Before the Darkness. It's basically mostly Jerry Conway's written stories from before Paul Levitz took over and the Great Darkness saga began. It has some fun illustrations by Steve Ditko, not at his peak, but still kind of cool, and a lot of Jimmy James, who I think was a very good, solid Legion artist. I really kind of enjoy his storytelling. And then I dug up some of these. So this is, I think, how maybe as a kid I got a hold of one of these Legion of Superheroes digests, and I think this might be my introduction, one of these, or another one that isn't even one of these, introduction to the Legion. I think it's possible that there was one that had Dave Cockrum art or there's Kurt Swan. Dave Cockrum art or Mike Grell art, or maybe both in one of these pamphlets or one of these digests, and that might have clued me into those guys. This one's Carmen Infantino. I don't know why. It appeals to the really geeky superhero fan to have all of this kind of trivia about all the groups. To tell the truth, I think I now like the Kurt Swan Legion best. I'm looking here. I'm seeing even Kurt Tuska looks good to me. So yeah, why the Legion is both, to me, very silly and a lot of stuff that's not given a lot of thought in terms of logic or anything like that. So it's always like it really appeals to this geeky little boy inside of me, and it kind of frustrates me. Here's a few other random issues that I've been looking at. Here's one from the Dave Cockrum era. I should now. I just have random Dave Cockrum issues. I probably should collect the whole Dave Cockrum era, because he was a very creative, solid kind of science fiction superhero artist. He was really, really well suited, I think, for the Legion. And maybe at this stage in their careers, he was a little more solid of a artist than Mike Grell was, although Mike Grell had a kind of a flashy style and a sexiness to him. Okay. Yeah, and I also have... So I assume this is a Kurt Swan cover. I love these kinds of things. Along with the Lois Lane books and stuff, the sillier the Superboy and Legion of Superheroes stories are of this era, the more it kind of excites me. Excite might be the wrong word, but tickles my funny bone, tickles my fan bone. And there's something. I think is this Kurt Swan? This must be Kurt Swan. It may not even say. But there's something about Kurt Swan or whoever was working on this. It kind of evokes a feeling kind of similar to modern artists like Michael Allred and a few other artists out there who have kind of a retro modern style. That looks like a Kurt Swan cover to me. Yeah, I like a lot of Kurt Swan Superman, but I think I really like him even more on the Legion for some reason, if that is Kurt Swan. Again, I can't see. There's no credits for writer or artist here. Well, someone might be able to tell me if that is or isn't Kurt Swan. And while I'm just obsessing a little more, I bought a while back this hardback version of a Treasury edition that was written by Paul Levitz and drawn by Mike Grell. Unfortunately, it was inked by Vince Colletta. And there is a feeling of, to me, a lack of substantiality to some of the art in here. Some of it's really great. But Vince, if only Dick Giordano or Mike Grell himself had inked it rather than Colletta. But it's still very cool. Time travel particularly brings up huge discussions of outrage with my daughter about, if they have this time travel, why aren't they normally using it? They're just sort of randomly using it at certain times. This cover is particularly great. So I assume this came out a little later than Mike Grell's run. It was kind of a Mike Grell returning to it, given that it was Paul Levitz as the writer, and I don't think they worked together much. I haven't checked the dates. I also have this one, which is kind of a classic cover. Who did this cover? I think Mike Grell did this cover. It says MG. And but inside is Kurt Swan and Jack Abel, and that is an amazing splash page. It almost looks like Barry Windsor Smith or something there. I've read this story actually in a smaller version. I guess I should reread it in its larger version. But it's weird. I wonder if that splash was done by someone else. Or maybe they just put a lot more work on it. Because the rest of the artwork, it doesn't seem to draw the wizard the same way that Moore drew. And just in general has a different vibe. So I don't know what's up there. Okay, so because I've been procrastinating on doing a video, maybe that has kept me from going to my to be read stack very much. And mostly I've been reading comics with my daughter, following kind of the whims of our reading style, which has mostly been about reading as crazily cosmic Marvel comics as we can find. So we read a bunch of Thor, stuff that comes in the latter half of this Kirby is Mighty, gigantic, I don't know what they call these books, not galleries, I'm not sure. So I'll show you later. We looked for a bunch of stories about Thor and Galactus and the Ego, the Living Planet, and specifically we were trying to find the first telling of the origin of Galactus, which kind of happens here, but is kind of wonky, or kind of not quite really giving his origin. But what I've been spending a lot of time reading is this book about James Warren, the publisher of Creepy and Eerie, and I've really been enjoying it. And it's been keeping me up at night. I'll read a little before going to bed, and then I'll I think I'll read one more chapter, and then I'm up late. But one thing that I'll talk about it maybe more after I've completely finished the book. But one thing that's striking me is I always think of a publisher as someone who views themselves as a conduit between the creative people and the audience. But I think that James Warren saw himself as a celebrity, it was more about his own ego, I think. I didn't ever realize that from reading his magazines, but reading this, it feels that way. It's pretty fascinating. I mean, an endless parade of amazing artists come in and out of the story, and James Warren is kind of like a wannabe Hugh Hefner, I guess, is the best way to describe him. And it gives you a sense of what a hustle the life of a small publisher was, at least back then. So I'll flip the camera around. Reading so many issues of the Legion of Superheroes in a row gave me a definite kind of whiplash between love and frustration of this comic and this particular era, I suppose, of this comic. Although I think it holds true I think some of my feelings hold true for many of the eras of the Legion of Superheroes, which is kind of excitement of all the potential and all the cool characters, and a frustration at times at the lack of follow-through or the kind of ultimately triteness of the stories or lack of logic to the science fictional situations. But on top of that, I had lingering in my head a childhood memory of thinking that if I could only read some Mike Grell Legion of Superheroes, it would be the most fantastic art ever. And at the beginning of his run, the art is very uneven. This splash page is a good example where the the monster here and this figure of is that Invisible Lad are done quite well, but then some of these other figures look wrong, and maybe throughout the early issues there's a sense for me of Grell kind of struggling with placement, that there's a lack of beauty to his compositions of individual panels at times, and in a sense it's kind of influenced by the fact that in recent years, I have read a lot more of the early Jim Shooter period, the period with a lot of Kurt Swan artwork, and there's something. It's a simpler style and more olden days style, but there's something very just right about it in a lot of ways, even in just the way the characters are composed in a panel or these individual science fiction panels are done. Perhaps less risks are being taken, or it's just from a different era. But I really have, in recent years, gotten into this art style. So this Mike Grell art style that I so craved when I was a kid didn't quite work for me right away. And on top of that, especially, as I said, I think before, especially the stories by Cary Bates have that kind of Bronze Age continuation of the Silver Age DC, where they do little kind of trick stories, like these bad guys turn out to be our heroes in disguise, and things are not what they seem. And I think those stories worked better in the 60s than in the 70s, a lot of Marvel stuff. That said, this is kind of this very first Mike Grell and team up between Mike Grell and Cary Bates has a real powerful element in it, which is the death of one of the Legion. Now, that had been done before with Pharaoh Kid. Was that by Jim Shooter? I'm not sure. You can see, like, this is, I don't know, there's just something that doesn't quite work as well in these in a lot of these panels for me. But, you know, amazingly, as far as I can, when I look up on Mike's Amazing World of Comics, this would be the very first penciled issue of a comic that Mike Grell ever did. So in a way, it's pretty fantastic and impressive. And he very quickly added to his roster, along with doing the Legion of Superheroes or the Superboy Legion book, the Green Lantern, Green Arrow book, and then Warlord got started up. So he was doing 3 different comics that were, I think, coming out bi-monthly, but still, it's impressive that he got that far. But anyway, at the end of this story, the Invisible Kid dies, which seems to me like a big thing. And it's also implied that he's now a ghost and can join with this other ghost, which he actually thought was someone in another dimension, but it actually was a dead girl that he was communicating with somehow with his Invisible Kid powers. And so now they are together, I guess. We're not even shown them together. The Invisible Kid and Milo will be together at last for all eternity. So that's kind of I don't know. It's a weird thing to wrap your head around. But then in the very next issue, there's no mention of the Invisible Kid. So that made me think about how different these are from Marvel Comics at the time, where, say, Gwen Stacy dies, that's going to be all over. And even when Captain Stacy died, that's going to be all over the thoughts and the life and the experience of the hero and the people and the supporting cast. You know, and this is another Cary Bates one. I don't know why maybe I'm unfairly down on Cary Bates, because this actually was another cool idea where there's this kid 1,000 years after the Legion who discovers there's something wrong in their history and he has to correct it. So he time travels and uses his future technology, much like Booster Gold, to pretend to be a superhero so that he can write the timeline and fix things the way history's supposed to be. And there's definitely like cool bits, but still the panels, I don't know why it all seems a little awkward to me. It's funny, at the time when I first read these a few weeks ago, I think I was particularly down on the Cary Bates stories, maybe unfairly so. There's an up-the-nose shot, which there's a lot of Gil Kane up-the-nose shots, but this I think of as more a Neil Adams up-the-nose shot, if you will. Anyway, I do wonder to some extent if, like, I always thought of Mike Grell as being influenced almost entirely by Neil Adams, but as looking through these, I start to see quite a bit of Jim Starlin influence. And Jim Starlin must have been almost at the same time, maybe a year or two before, really hitting his stride with his cosmic stories. Oh, and the backup story is another really weird one, also by Cary Bates, in which it turns out that Brainiac had a robot who made itself up to be like Supergirl, and fulfills his fantasies about Supergirl. And in the end, the robot sacrifices itself for him. And then the real Supergirl shows up. Very kind of kooky story. So anyway, and then this reminded me, I am positive this splash page is actually by Neil Adams. This reminded me of what Neil Adams can do and how right the figures here just have a rightness to them that then the work by Grell doesn't quite capture yet that Adams had. This was another story where it seems like the Legion has become evil and is going to kill their own friends. And eventually we find out it's a villain controlling them, of course. The villain's kind of fun looking. Kind of a nerd alien. Once you take away his power helmet, he's nothing. I think. So, and when do they, I think this was maybe the last issue where Grell didn't do the covers. He went on to be a really great cover artist, I must say. Okay, here, now this is 4 issues later, finally we get some acknowledgement over the death of, a callback to the death of Invisible Kid, and also the death of Pharaoh Boy, and they seem to be haunting Superman. But and eventually, this is really creepy, I thought. It turns out that these are clones of those 2 heroes, who think they are those heroes, I guess. And their lifespan is only 48 hours. And so they have genetic material for every member of the Legion so that in the future they can clone them. And the implications of that are pretty great in my mind, but we never see that pop up again, I don't think. Well, not in these issues, 20 or 24 issues that I've read. There's a cool monster designed by Grell. I like that one. And there's some other moments of cool art. Like, I love that hand actually on the cover. Is this Grell's first cover? It's quite a well done cover. It's like I feel like he's kind of feeling his way towards his own manner of composing pictures and making them work, balancing them out properly. So he is getting better at that, and he's also showing some signs of experimentation, again, probably with some Neil Adams and Jim Starlin type of influence on this experimentation. I liked that. What do we have here? This one is, another story with villains and such. This was an intense one, and so another one. This is by Jim Shooter. Was this the first Jim Shooter one? Jim Shooter kind of returns to DC at this point. Who Can Save the Princess? And so, I don't know, I felt a big difference when I read a Jim Shooter story. There was more emotion, more immediacy, more intensity, and less of a formulaic feeling. And my understanding of the old school DC is that the editors would kind of impress upon the writers these formulas that they had to follow. And maybe Jim Shooter, at this point, he was older, I'm assuming in his early 20s, but now a veteran of working with these DC editors. Maybe he knew how to work the system and get a stronger story out of it. But he was always one of the strongest Legion writers. So this one, Princess Projectra, has some terrible pain disease that kills you through pain, but they have a way of having other people take on her pain, but each hero can only do it for about an hour before it becomes too much, and it drives them insane. It makes them irrational. So really an interesting concept. We get different people taking turns, and I feel like it's probably just in my brain, but my subjective experience. But I feel like Grell's art starts to get better on on a lot of the Jim Shooter stories. And it's just getting better in general, but I just sort of had that sense, everything coming together more. And maybe it's the script by Jim Shooter. The backup is by Cary Gates this time. Carrie Bates this time, and I did think the art was a bit weaker, and the story is more of a toss-off. And this was probably in this sequence of 20, this was the first story that I really got into in some level, about a soldier from the past who gets awakened by this training session with Lightning Lad. They don't know they've awakened him. He had thrown himself on some kind of radiation grenade and been buried, but I guess in a state of stasis, kind of. And he comes back, and this art just really sizzles. I mean, this is the first issue. I thought it started to get better with this issue. This story, I thought the art was perfect Mike Grell art throughout, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And I found the idea of this soldier who didn't know he was in the future, and with the power of his mind, he was able to create invisible weapons, but it was actually using his mind. And the Legion has to solve that problem and stop the destruction. And even though the soldier dies in the end, there's a sense of pathos, and that the Legion understands his sacrifice and that kind of thing. Oh, and this is a bizarre one, also by Jim Shooter and Mike Grell, but it feels completely different. It's the origin of Karate Kid, or sort of exploring the background of Karate Kid, which is cool. But from one page to the next, the Karate Kid becomes more looking like Bruce Lee. And some Asians have very yellow skin, apparently. So yeah, it's kind of funny how at times he starts to look like Bruce Lee. I don't know if this is the first time he's looked like Bruce Lee, but I don't recall him clearly even looking Asian or half Asian as he's supposed to be in these pictures. In a way, he looks more Asian than these odd stereotypes of Asians. But it also, I assume the Master of Kung Fu had been out at this point. His story now kind of parallels the Master of Kung Fu's story, that he is the son of an evil Asian martial arts villain and a European woman, and just like Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. Yep, is this one a Jim Shooter or some of them aren't signed. Wait, this one is a Jim Shooter, and it's about revenge and how to handle crime, in a sense, psychologically, when it's against you. And the moral conundrums that the Legion get put in sometimes are less than convincing to me, or it seems to be saying really they would have killed them if something hadn't stopped them. And this is another one that kind of makes me question the way the Legion works, where there's a group of heroes that they reject for having the same powers that members of the Legion do, but then they prove that they can defeat their opposite, like they're more powerful than the members of the Legion who have the same powers. But then later they're defeated because they don't use teamwork. But that, of course, is because they haven't had the Legion training yet. The whole idea that there can only be one character with a given power in the Legion, but there's all these aliens out there with superpowers, there's something just kind of illogical about that. Anyway, this just kind of made me think about that, but not be very satisfied with the answer. This one has just the wacky notion of a space dinosaur or space dragon, and then that the supervillain keeps his hideout inside the mouth of the space dragon so that no one can find him. But of course the Legion cracks it and finds him, and so it goes. your story of your spoiled rich kid and robots. There's some of the imagery here reminds me of Magnus Robot Fighter. I thought that was fun. But the art doesn't seem quite up to the level of art with the one with that soldier from the past. Now, as I was saying, Mike Grell is taking on a lot. And eventually they bring in Bob Wyacek as an inker. But up to this point, Grell is doing all the inking. So it's a big job. Also, I don't know. I think some people will disagree with me, but Tyrock is, and I hate to use the word problematic, but it's a problematic concept looking back on it, and it feels like a kind of clueless person's way of adding in people of African extraction into the world of the Legion of Superheroes. There's this city that only has black people, and they want to stay separate from the rest of the world. They don't want the help of the Legion of Superheroes, and they have their own incredible superhero, and the hero who hated the Legion, and they feel that the rest of the world is racist against them, and that the Legion never comes and helps them. So now we don't want your help. I think that's how it goes. And then at the end, let me see if I can. Oh no, that's the backup story. He says, why did you save us? It's the Legion's job to save lives, not to make friends. When it comes to race, we're colorblind. Blue skin, yellow skin, green skin. We're brothers and sisters, united in the name of justice everywhere. And yet they never had brown skins. I guess I've been wrong about a lot of things, says Tyrock. Then you'll reconsider what we asked you? I know it's a big decision. I'll give it a try, Karate Kid. I'm coming back to Metropolis with you to see if I qualify to become a Legionnaire. Long live the Legion. And I don't know, it strikes me as a person who wants black people to admit that he wasn't racist, which is like putting the needs of the white person's feelings before the needs of the African person's feelings. Anyway, I just thought that was odd. Was that Jim Shooter, or that I believe was Carrie Bates? Yeah. And is this one signed? Yeah, this is a Jim Shooter story. The art here is struggling again. There's some good parts and some parts that just seem like they aren't as good as I would hope they would be. But the general arc is getting better, and again, better to me when Jim Shooter is writing it. I always love it when I love the Fatal Five. Yeah, this one has nice artwork. It's another Jim Shooter one. From a suggestion, I wonder if that's a fan suggestion, Ken Klazak. Haven't heard of him. So maybe it's a friend of Jim Shooter's, or a fan wrote in an idea for a story. At times, Mike Grell is doing interesting things with the layouts. Yeah, this one has quite nice artwork. Okay, then the one that I really started to love the stories was this Grimbor and... in fact, this is probably my favorite run in the whole run. Grimbor and Charma. And now I read a later Grimbor story and I thought he was a really silly character, but as Jim Starlin portrays him here, it really works. This sort of master locksmith, master maker of prisons and chains and stuff, who's worked for everybody, who's so good at his craft that people have worked for him all over the universe. But now Charma, and he just cares about his craft, but Charma wants a lot of money. And the team up of the two is very interesting. The concept of Charma is on men. Her magical or mutant ability makes men so enchanted with them that they can't do anything. They're dumbstruck. While the Chainsman, while Grimbor's fighting Timberwolf, Superboy can't help. He's just stuck in front of Charma. And they have a plot that Charma's come up with for ransom money to get R.J. Brand to pay them billions of dollars. But an interesting thing when we learn, and look how great this page looks, I think. We learn the background of Charma. Not only does she have this effect on men, when she's around women, the women hate her and want to harm her. So she was sent to this girls' reformatory or girls' orphanage, and she was tortured and beaten up and bullied. The headmistress had a punishment chair. As I got older, I was punished more frequently, and they even started calling it Charma's chair. And then when they don't ever want to let her go because they want to continue to torture her, but they bring in Grimbor to, make sure to, to lock her in even more. Grimbor, of course, immediately falls under a spell, and he rescues her, and now she draws him into a life of crime. Anyway, I thought it was very cool, and cool concept, and harsh, kind of a tough concept by Jim Shooter. And the art was really good in this issue. Anyway, it was a good, full issue story with a lot of intensity, to me anyway. And I think because I've read a later Grimbor story where Charma has died, they must come back and then something happens. But I enjoyed the Grimbor story that I read, a number of years later, written, I think it was in the early 80s, written by Jerry Conway, but it didn't have the power or convincingness of this version of Grimbor. And then back to Cary Bates, and with Tyrock being their only black hero, maybe it's just modern oversensitivity, but I found this image and then the image on the splash page here very evocative of the enslavement of Africans in history, in U.S. history. Although they do put some people of African heritage in the background, but still, he being their only African or black member, he's gone criminal apparently, and he's just gone wild and out of control, and so he has to be captured and imprisoned. Now, all of that eventually turns out to be a trick, and it's not what it seems, and everything's fine. But still, I don't know. Given that I already felt uneasy about the portrayal of Tyrock and the attempts by Cary Bates to say, "See, we're not racist," that I found that just kind of an odd thing. And these last two, along with the Grimbor issues, are my other favorite issues in this little era. And they are both written by Jim Shooter, I believe, and they're a bit connected. So this mostly features a big fight against the Time Trapper, but the Time Trapper is being manipulated by Stargrave, or Pulsar Stargrave, as he eventually is called. And the plotting is very clever. The art is very effective, very cool layouts. I really enjoyed this issue. Another one of those things where I did read this one with my daughter because I knew she would like it and be upset. Look how good that panel is. And to me, it does evoke some of that, again, the Jim Starlin feel. That there's a red sun, which would depower Superboy, kept behind a door. And the illogic of that, when you consider the actual heat and power of the nuclear furnace that is a sun, is kind of laughable. I kind of normally would just accept these things in comics, but when I'm reading with my daughter, she loves to be outraged by the offenses to astronomy and astrophysics. But great images, and a very clever thing where the time trapper is taking all of the characters outside of time and is sort of fighting them all together within the same time and space, in a sense. And the switching back and forth. It's a very artful issue in the writing and the art. And then when Pulsar Stargrave is kind of revealed to the Legion and fights them directly, it's a very cool sequence also. Again, kind of, I get the Jim Starlin vibes there. This is Stargrave has two hench people. This woman named Quicksand, I believe, and I forget what the other creature is called, something like Grabber or something. Anyway, and now the story editor is Denny O'Neil, and I wonder if that's the first time an editor is listed. I don't know if it's the first issue Denny O'Neil edited, but these later issues might be affected by who the editors were, the changing of the guard of the editors. But Stargrave is immensely powerful, has another kind of silly astronomical thing because he got his powers by being shot into a sun just before it turned nova by some aliens who thought he was dead, and that's how they honored their dead. There's this amazing page where Stargrave punches Superboy out into space, which is paralleled later with Superboy and one of the other members of the Legion punching Stargrave into a sun as a way to defeat him. But that's later on. So he's kind of being set up as a major figure, I think, by Jim Starlin, by Jim Shooter. And with the revelation by the end of the issue that he, in fact, is Brainiac 5's long-lost father. And he's looking to recruit the Legion to help him against Mordru, who's even a bigger threat to the universe. So I was really excited by this, but this is the last issue written by Jim Shooter and the last issue drawn by Jim Starlin. And the concept of Stargrave as Brainiac's father is gotten rid of, and Stargrave becomes more of kind of a joke of a character, just another villain in a way. So this Kirby is Mighty volume is kind of ridiculously big. There's the artist edition, an artist edition next to it, by comparison. And we read some ridiculously amazing Thor comics in it, my daughter and I. I'm always amazed by those widespread legs. That's like the ultimate in, my mind can't quite comprehend how that's possible. Here's what the size of a comic book compared to this. So like I said before, I think my daughter and I were looking for the original origin of Galactus. And I at first thought it started in this issue. So we ended up reading, I think, 5 or 6 issues following this in search of the full origin of Galactus. So this is full of amazing stuff. starting with the colonizer Tana Nile coming and asking Thor for his aid in helping the colonizers with Galactus, and he, being the good guy that he is, even though they've been his enemies in the past, says, "Yeah, sure, I'll come help you." Never hath Thor turned his back on those in need. And there's a really cool. This is going to be a really sloppy handheld kind of situation, but that's a really cool panel there. Yeah, I don't know how to handle books this big, and I think it has a parallel coming up with another on another page. Yeah, there's the parallel, in my mind, parallel kind of panel. So the first one is Thor and Tana Nile taking off from Earth, and then there's this really cool panel of the not Machine Man, I want to call him Machine Man, the Recorder taking off from Asgard, where Odin has kind of indicated to him that he should go help Thor against Galactus. And Sif wants to go, but Odin says something like, "You're just a girl, you can't go help. Only the Recorder can go." I guess the Recorder is somehow viewed as powerful. I'm never quite clear on that. So one of the factors here is that there's all kinds of amazing cosmic stuff, but a lot of it remains unclear, undefined, and I think and it gets even worse, I think, by the time we really do get to Galactus's origin, which becomes almost a non-origin because there's so little not explained, so much not explained, and I think the factors are Stan Lee trying to interpret whatever Jack Kirby drew, and I don't think Stan had any input ahead of time as to what the plot was, or like what Galactus's origin was, or how you would defeat Galactus. Left all that up to Jack to just draw, and then Stan would come in and kind of guess what's going on or make stuff up. And Stan does not have a great grasp of science or science fiction, I think. Not to put the man down, he's good at a lot of other things. But such amazing visuals. And Kirby knows he's doing an epic, right? And he's making much larger panels than he normally would, more single-page panels, and other kind of wild things. But yeah, I think also the other factor is, I'm not totally sure of the timeline, but I have read there's a point at which Kirby was kind of tuning out a bit. He didn't want to give away all his ideas to Stan Lee anymore. So he may have not been, I don't know. He may have had a totally clear idea of what was going on here, or he may have just been throwing out stuff and not wanting to do as much work as he had in the past in terms of the plotting or coming up with original ideas. Although there's such amazing stuff in here, I think I would love to know how Kirby would have described exactly what's going on. Like here we get the battle royale between Ego, the living planet, called here the sentient bioverse, which I think is a cool term, but what exactly that means, I don't know. We've got Galactus, who says, "I'm striking with the fire of 1,000 suns." That there's no logic behind that statement. Of course, the fire of 1,000 suns would destroy Ego, but also how would Galactus, who eats planets, have the power of 1,000 suns at his fingertips? But anyhow, still, it's just amazing stuff to behold. Love that cover. The kind of, I think you might call it forced perspective here between Galactus and Ego, and Thor caught in the middle is amazing. A great concept that Jack Kirby throws in is of these aliens, although who knows how much is Jack Kirby and how much is Stan Lee. These aliens who've been drifting through space for eons, being the first race whose planet was destroyed by Galactus. And they've been waiting for their chance for revenge. So now they're following into the battle themselves. And when Thor and the Recorder end up just floating in space, these are the aliens those aliens who will be able to rescue them from the space. I have heard that these Jack Kirby collages were almost like a hobby of his, that he made a lot of collages. This was said on a panel I saw at Rose City Comic Con a year or two ago, a Kirby tribute panel. So I'm thinking he might have had the collages laying around and decided, hey, this one kind of fits, or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he custom made this collage for this event. But I find the collages kind of interesting but visually confusing. So they stand for something, but I'm not sure what. So I almost picture in this story that Ego is more than just a sentient planet, like he's some being beyond a planet. And I'd love to know more of Jack Kirby's thoughts on that. The other factor, as I was looking through this, I feel that, at least at this point, the inker, Vince Colletta, much hated inker Vince Colletta, although one of the main inker on Thor for a long, long time, I think his work was pretty strong here. It has a little more weight than some earlier Colletta inking. But every time there's a blank background, I wonder, because he's famous for having erased things in the background, are we missing stuff? Now, he's not cheaping out too much here in these big event panels, but there were elsewhere in the stuff we read, like in some of these panels, I wonder, was background detail removed, or background figures. And so in the vagueness of it all, somehow Thor, by attaching his hammer to this device, is able to cast Galactus far away. So in some vague sense that I can't really understand, Thor and the aliens who wanted revenge and Ego together have driven Galactus away. And in a nice kind of a nice ending they set up here is that these people who have been wandering in space for at least millennia, if not eons, are now given an ideal environment created by Ego where they can live in until the end of time. Now, I don't know if they're ever mentioned again, because I know Ego shows up a lot in Thor a few years later as a villain again. And then there was, reading with my daughters, like, oh, I guess I was wrong. That didn't include the origin of Galactus, but here must be the origin of Galactus. Galactus a-borning, or Galactus is born, by Smiling Stan and Jolly Jack. But there's kind of a birth of Galactus in here, or a early sighting of Galactus, but it really doesn't explain anything. There are plenty of cool moments. We visit the colonizer world. Things like this, I wonder if they were simplified by Vinnie Colletta, but I have no idea. But we get a nice moment with the Recorder having his kind of humanity acknowledged, and then Thor heads off back to Asgard, and then there's a whole bunch of to-do with Odin and about using this giant, what do they call it, the spatial screen. I think later it's called the Visi screen. And they look into the past of Galactus. Such as him who art Galactus. Now let yon image fade. But then we get another image, but this time not created by the screen, but created by Odin's rod. And we see some destroyed planet and battling spaceships, and then Galactus's, what do they call it? Galactus's life, is it like his incubator of some sort? Contains a fearsome newborn life form. So so this is, I guess, the first time Galactus shows up somewhere, but it doesn't look at all like the planet of those aliens who we were told before were the first people to be destroyed by Galactus. So Galactus lives, he destroys the forces of that planet and consumes the planet. And what does it say here? For Galactus must be true to his unfathomable destiny. I guess Galactus can't even fathom his own destiny. But that's it. So it's not clear what's going on. It's not coherent with what we were told in the issues before. And then it ends, and Thor is sent back to Earth for further adventures. And then several issues later, or maybe many issues later, I'm trying to remember. Let me see if I can find it. Galactus Found. So now it's interesting. We have George Klein inking, and we get a very different style, and maybe more detail on all the Kirby tech and backgrounds. I'm not sure. But Odin decides that Thor needs to find Galactus, so he gets Thor to go in something that they call the Odin ship. And the Odin ship is this, of course, special because it's Odin. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in Earth, which isn't really that interesting. It doesn't have much to do, doesn't have anything to do with this Galactus plot. But, excuse me. So Thor's ship is kind of, even though supposedly it's a magic ship that can find Galactus, later they say Galactus is controlled the ship and guided it to him because he has had enough of life or whatever, and he just wants, I don't know if he wants to tell his story to Thor, and maybe he wants Thor to kill him. I don't know if it's a suicide attempt or what have you. So he kind of puts Thor half asleep to show him this story of the Watcher finding his ship after a great plague. And then Thor and he agree that Thor can wake up and be told the rest of the story because they're not going to fight right now. And next, the Why of Galactus. This is an interesting cover, and I don't know if it presages the fact that Kirby was in the process of leaving Marvel, but there's all these background pictures by Kirby, and then the foreground stuff is pretty obviously to me done by John Romita. So that's interesting. The monster and the man god, but the inside, the awesome answer. And there's a lot of awesome art, but I don't think there's much of an answer. But we get kind of a story of the planet Ta, where Galactus, when he was a human, comes from sometime far in the past, but not in another universe or an earlier version of the universe before the Big Bang, as later was part of the Galactus story. But it's this wonderful, wondrous planet, but a plague that's been traveling across the universe has reached Ta, and the planet is doomed, or the civilization is doomed. And we get cool sequences of traveling around the planet and seeing the devastation of the plague. And then the last few survivors get into a spaceship because they've decided that the honorable thing to do, sort of as a tribute to their greatness, is to fly this spaceship on a suicide mission directly into the largest star in the universe. Why? What does that mean? I don't know. They don't seem to fly. Everyone dies as they approach that star, of course, except one of them, our hero, who is not named Galen, but I guess later will be named Galen, who is Galactus. And rather than dying, he has a strange new life force throbbing and bursting within him. I guess it comes from this largest sun in the universe, perhaps. So, on one hand, we have the idea that this plague has perhaps destroyed life throughout the universe, or sentient life throughout the universe. And then we just get Galactus comes on this plague-ridden ship to a planet where the Watcher's hanging out. The Watcher observes it. Because the Watcher somehow knows the future along with the past on some level, he knows that Galactus is going to cause terrible damage throughout the universe, and he considers destroying Galactus before any bad. I guess this is Galactus being born here, a new version of him being born, and the Watcher considers destroying him but decides not to. If fate so decrees, then he must live, though galaxies die. He departs, and for ages yet uncounted, I may yet live to regret my decision. So Galactus goes off into the void in a very different, I guess, creates his costume and then goes within this incubator waiting to become Galactus. So that's his origin, but it doesn't really answer any questions or explain Galactus at all. So I wonder if Jack Kirby had an explanation there that Stan Lee did not know, or whether he just sort of threw a bunch of images he thought looked cool and figured Stan will have to figure it out for himself. So my daughter gets a kick out of all this and kind of also laughs at all its illogicalness, because she loves astronomy and physics at the moment and the logic of it all, and this is kind of the counterbalance to that. So anyway, super fun for me to read with her, and mostly just to enjoy the Jack Kirby art and try to imagine what might have really been going on.
Last but not least, I want to do a little haul, show you some of the things I picked up recently. One cool thing is Travis, aka Comics with Bueller, picked me up The Recount, the graphic novel, and I remember him talking about this book. It's by one of his favorite writers, Hendrick. What's Hendrick's first name? Jonathan Hendrick. So I'm really looking forward to reading The Recount. I think it was written before all the stuff happened with the 2020 election, but it kind of may reflect upon that accidentally. And then on the lighter side, I picked up Alter Ego Classics, Collector's Item Classics. It's 3 significant issues of Alter Ego. One all about Steve Ditko, one all about Jack Kirby, and one all about Stan Lee. So I'm assuming that we'll get some of Roy Thomas's personal takes on these seminal characters, all of which he has probably worked with at some point. But I don't know, because I know that Roy Thomas at some point stopped actually writing for Alter Ego and just edited it. So this looks really cool. I love everything put out by Tomorrow's. I buy too many Tomorrow's books and never get around to reading them all. That's one of my goals, is to read more of them. You would think that James Warren book that I showed before was from Tomorrow's, but that was actually from Fantagraphics. And another thing I should say about that James Warren book, I was incredibly impressed so far by how thoroughly it's been researched. Speaking of Warren, I got The Art of Vampirilla, The Warren Years, which is basically every cover of Vampirilla from the original run from the Warren comics. So a lot of the same artists repeat over and over again, as he had kind of a staple. At first, Frank Frazetta, and then Ken Kelly and San Julian. And then there's another artist who I think is even more well-known for his... Heinrich has probably done the most Vampirilla covers of all. It's funny, I haven't really read a lot of Vampirilla, but I have I have some Vampirilla issues, and now I have a whole art book on Vampirilla. I couldn't resist that. Another one, I finally decided I better pull the trigger on this Dynamite Alex Ross book before it stops being available, because it's been out for quite a while. Unfortunately, the binding's not so great on this one.
So it's very, very, very tight. But it's stuff that Alex Ross did for Dynamite, but includes, I think, variant covers that he must have done via Dynamic Forces that are of Marvel books also. Yeah. So anyway, that looks interesting. And then another art book. This one's exciting. I need to learn more about Ramona Fraden, who I always accidentally call Ramona Frandon. But her art style is very appealing, and she kind of breaches across the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and a little bit into the Bronze Age of comics, I believe. And I think she's still alive, and occasionally they bring her back for a project or two. Most well known for her work at this point on Aquaman and on Metamorpho, I believe. I think she also did a lot of work on the Super Friends. Yeah, there's a bunch of Super Friends comics. So I don't know, a really interesting piece of comics history. A pioneer, I guess you'd call her. But that's not all. This is Nauman's fault. He was showing me some comic strips. He was showing me the very earliest Superman daily comic strips from 1939, I believe, or early 1940. It's ironic that they wanted a Superman originally to be a comic strip. They couldn't convince anyone to do it. And then after they sold their idea to the comic book publisher who then owned it, then it becomes a comic strip. But they did get their names on a comic strip, and they were paid pretty well at first until they got into legal problems. And Nauman is doing a little project about different origins of Superman, and this will play into it. I think I'll be on some video of his coming up talking about this origin of Superman as portrayed in this book. Nice hefty book. And not last but not least on the books that I picked up, and probably the next thing I'll read after the Warren book, is Confabulation, an anecdotal autobiography by Dave Gibbons. In fact, I already have read bits and pieces of it because it's designed to be read in bits and pieces. It's laid out like an encyclopedia of everything that Dave Gibbons has done or that interests him in comics. So he just has entries on things. And so you can just pick it up and read an entry, see what Dave Gibbons has to say about John Byrne. Or what does Dave Gibbons have to say about Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed? Is that a Harlan Ellison story or a Ray Bradbury story? Jeanette Kahn, Bob Kane. So it's in alphabetical order. So it's completely unlike any other autobiography I've ever read, and I really appreciate it. And I'm amazed by how nicely produced. It's from Dark Horse. Great binding, of course, and just wonderful illustrations throughout. So it's a really joyful autobiography. And I suspect that Dave Gibbons did it this way because he's not as egotistical as some people. So it's not all about me, me, me. It's more about all these different things that have intersected my life that might be interesting to you, the reader. But I'll have to read more to see if I'm right about that. And then finally, a different thing for my hauls is I thought I'd show you some of the original art I picked up in the last few months. These are minor pieces by artists that I worship. So sometimes I think, in my original art collecting, maybe if I just bought one or two really top-end pieces, that would be a better investment. But I'd rather own a lot of minor art and have a wide-ranging collection. So for instance, here adds to my my Gene Colan collection. It's a page out of Wonder Woman from the brief period when Gene Colan was brought in to do a revamp on Wonder Woman along with Roy Thomas, I believe. This is Wonder Woman 289. Is there a date on the back? This would have been 1982. And Romeo Tangal is the inker. So it's a perfectly nice scene, but it's obviously not a money shot kind of piece. But I'm really glad to have it. And then I love Nestor Redondo's art, particularly on Rima the Jungle Girl. And this is a page from Rima the Jungle Girl number 3, page 7. And it's a pretty minor page, but it's still got that beautiful Nestor Redondo ink work and layouts. So, and then also out of Rima the Jungle Girl, but number 1 is a non-Rima story, the backup story, which was called Space Voyagers. So I have some Alex Nino artwork from Space Voyagers. It's not as wild as some of his later artwork, but it's really cool. And to be honest, I'm going to take this out of the plastic and hold it and just look at it and feel like I'm holding the same piece of paper that Alex Nino worked on. That direct connection, I don't know, sometimes is kind of powerful for me, buying original art. So there you go. I hope everyone's been having a good comics week or comics reading month. I hope that I'll get back on a more regular pace with these videos, but no promises, no guarantees. And talk to you all again soon.